Today we sat down with Cara Muhlhahn, one of New York City's most respected midwives. We were deeply inspired by her wisdom, strength, and commitment to empowering women through the process of birth. Could you tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming a midwife?
It started very young. I think that, first of all, the journey really comes from within. When I was a teenager, I saw my sister's best friend get hit by a car. And for some reason, in that situation, I knew how to handle everything. Everyone else was crying and freaking, and I was doing emergency medicine with my first aid book. I don't know, it was just I could handle situations. And a lot of people think that midwives, hold your hands and make it better, and that's true in birth, but also I think that I found the side of myself that is good with unpredictable, potentially traumatic events and staying cool, and that's a really important part of who I am as a midwife too.
It's really interesting what you were saying about how the ability to react in those situations and also the ability to bring life into the world sort of combined in your interest to become a midwife, because when you're dealing with birth, you're also dealing with death.
No matter how smooth the variables are at any particular screenshot of that birth, that does not guarantee what's down the road, that it won't be potentially tragic or difficult. So that keeps me in a constant state of readiness. The death thing is best exemplified by actually a really recent experience I had. I walked in on the situation. The mom in labor was in the pool. She was kind of blissed out. There were not a lot of contractions. I said, this is really weird, because when birth is imminent, and she was fully dilated for a while, and there was no urge to push, and I had a really eerie feeling. The lesson I keep learning is that the intuition is actually more accurate than the data I'm collecting, which doesn't mean I have to not stop collecting the data. The data's there, ever present. But so the data I was getting on this mom was that everything was great. The heartbeat sounded great, beautiful, lovely. And then during one of the breaks from a contraction, when we listened to the baby when someone's pushing, I listened, and the baby heart rate was really low. And partially because of that instinct that had been kind of sitting here on my shoulder for the whole time, I became urgent. I'm like, you have to push the baby out now, and had to resuscitate the baby. So in that moment, everything had been completely fine up until then. And then, on a dime, the situation did a 180, 360, whatever, completely urgent and potentially tragic. And when I'm doing the resuscitation, and I'm skilled at it, there's always a moment, back to your life and death, when you're walking the line, when you're thinking, this baby's not gonna come around. I've always done my resuscitations with mouth to mouth, because you get a better seal. This is just me tilting a baby and putting my mouth over its nose and mouth and getting a good seal so the air goes into the lungs. But it's not only that, it's the will. And that will is important to that situation. And I really felt grateful, terrible gratitude. We call it terrifying gratitude, sitting there doing everything in my power, and yet I don't know if it's gonna work. And I just have to keep doing it, and it did, and the baby's fine.
We're very curious as to how you balance life in such a high-stakes sort of career.
You really can't not be completely devoted and dedicated, both in your heart and soul, and your ethical piece. I feel that that's like my inner religion. I feel that if I'm not completely dedicated, then I won't have the protection that I need. And I think that if I resented it, I wouldn't be able to do what I do. I think I actually cherish it. Then I get the full reward of that, of being a committed person.
I found being a first-time mom in this past year, that the times where I'm feeling oh, it's too much, I need a break, I need to step away, those are the exact moments I need to sit down with Oliver and really commit to exactly what's happening, because running away is not the problem. It's not fully committing to what is presently happening. And I think,
and there's a joy to embracing that.
And then all of a sudden, I don't feel the weight of
the burden.
It is that one foot in, one foot out. But actually, it doesn't really serve us in the long run.
When you look into your future, do you see, is this a lifelong thing? Is there going to be another chapter?
It's nice that you asked me that question. It's very relevant, because when my son is now going to be 20, even though parenthood continues, it continues in a way You know, I'm way more separated from what I need to do for him as a parent. That left a big space for me. And I immediately wanted to explore that space with creative endeavors. So I went to pastry school. A lot of the midwives talk about, oh, being on call, it's exhausting. And so I think the pastry was my attempt to kind of get away. But then I realized that I don't want to get away.
So actually your moment of sort of being open reinvigorated and like reignited a sort of passion and awareness that you are doing what you're meant to be doing.
Yeah. The other thing is that I find that my character, it tends to be perhaps potentially naive to a fault, but that actually that liking to live in a very, very trusted environment where I get the opportunity to create and spend most of my time in a world where trust is imperative, it's very soul nurturing for me because that's part of the way I'm wired. What's so transformative in terms of you having a baby and me being your midwife is that you get to participate in your own empowerment. I don't dictate that. And so that, again, is very satisfying for me, too.
Yeah. So you've lived in New York for a long time, and we'd love to know a little bit about your relationship to the city.
Oftentimes it's a love-hate relationship, but if I start with the love part, I was in midwifery school, and the dream was that I was living in a place that was multicultural, multiracial, multi-religious, with tenements, and I knew it was New York. I just knew that I had to come here. And then when I went to school at Downstate, Mario Cuomo was governor, and he paid a stipend for me to go to school. So I've always felt like New York has blessed my ambitions and furthered them in a way that seems kind of magical. So I also feel that I owe to give something back to New York, and I always feel the pleasure of giving back to New York. I take Medicaid patients, most midwives do, because I want to take care of whoever I can, no matter where they are on the economic scale, so that they can be empowered too. Someone who's maybe not economically empowered, because then become economically empowered by having an amazingly empowering birth experience.